Good morning. The public meeting of the Finance and Members and Participant Services Committee is being held at 30 North 3rd Street, Harrisburg, PA. By participating in this session, you are consenting to the recording, retention, and future viewing of this meeting. Although being live streamed via the internet, this meeting is a live, in-person meeting open to the public in accordance with the Sunshine Act. The live streaming of this meeting is presented as a convenience and is not provided as an official means for public attendance. In the event the live stream fails or cannot be transmitted for any reason, the in-person public meeting will continue without interruption. Please proceed with your meeting. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I am Mary Soderberg. I'm the chair of the Finance and Member and Participant Services Committee. So this morning I would like to call to order the meeting of the Finance and Member Participant Services Committee at 9 a.m. on April 22nd, 2022. This morning, Sarah McSurdy, our CFO, is not able to be with us, but her assistant CFO, Michael McGoey, is here and will be handling the roll call. Michael?
Good morning, everyone. Senator DeSanto?
This is Chuck Erdman for Senator DeSanto.
Good morning, Mr. Erdman. Board Chairman Philman?
Present.
Representative Frankel?
Pat Shaughnessy for Representative Frankel.
Good morning, Mr. Shaughnessy. Committee Chair Soderberg?
Here.
And Secretary Veg?
Is everyone here then?
Did we hear? Secretary Veg?
I believe his designee is here.
All right. We're going to have Mr. Flanagan filling in for him. And with that, all members or their designees are present.
Thank you very much. The first order of business is the approval of the minutes of February 24th. A motion is in order to approve the minutes of February 24th, 2022 of the Finance and Member and Participant Services Committee meeting. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
All right, I'm back with you guys.
Good morning, Senator. All those approving the minutes, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. The motion carries. Thank you very much. So this morning, we have no old business this morning, but we do have a very special presentation from our consultants, Korn Ferry Actuaries. I believe we've got Craig Graby and Chris Seitz on the line to do a presentation about the 2021 actuarial valuation results and the fiscal year 2022-2023 defined benefit employer contribution rate. And this is the rate that our employers use in their payroll calculations going forward in 22-23. So Chris, are you speaking today or Craig?
Yes, good morning, Mary. I'm going to start us off. I'm Chris Seitz, and then I'll turn it over to Craig to cover some of the other highlights and results.
Okay. It's all yours then. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. She described it perfectly. So this is a measurement as of December 31, 2021, and the ultimate purpose is to set the employer contribution rates that will begin July 1, 2022. So if we can jump forward a slide. We're going to go through some highlights, and then we have presented the full set of the contribution rates for the committee to review and ultimately make a motion to approve. And then we'll discuss kind of where we go from here. If we can move forward 2 more slides. So each year we will perform this valuation, and a lot of this will tie back into some of the education sessions that we had during the board retreat. Hopefully that helps give some context over what we covered today instead of it just seeming like a lot of numbers flying around. But again, we basically take a snapshot of the system as of 12/31, and we review the experience of the members and the investments during the calendar year. And we use that to provide information on the funded status, such as the funded ratio as of December 31, 2021. We'll be able to provide that. And we determine the employer contribution rates to be effective July 1, 2022. We also document the calculation of any applicable shared risk or shared gain adjustments in the member contribution rates. We will go through what was calculated this year, but we note that there will be no adjustments through June 30, 2023. The next time this will be measured and potentially an adjustment made would be based on investment performance through December 31, 2022. So we will, again, cover this briefly, but we in the future will be discussing more at a future date about how this could potentially affect the plan. We can move forward. So when we're setting the contribution rates, it again reflects the membership information as of 12/31 and the actuarial value of assets. So again, when we're setting these contribution rates, we use this asset smoothing method to help dampen the effect of investment market volatility. So you'll be able to see how that affects these results. In this case, obviously, with very strong investment performance in recent years, we actually have deferred investment gains that will be recognized in future valuations and help be able to either offset any potential unfavorable performance or will eventually be recognized according to the smoothing method, and we'll be able to see a lower employer contribution rates in the future. We also use the actuarial assumptions as have been adopted by the board based on the most recent experience study. And in this case, we also will be recognizing the advance payment that was received from PASHI in April of 2021. The system received $825 million from PASHI. And in the previous calendar year 2020, similarly received a amount of just over $1 billion from Penn State University. So if we can move forward. The biggest effective change in this valuation compared to the previous valuations is a change in the actuarial cost method. So the actuarial cost method is how we determine which liabilities should be assigned to the past and which liabilities should be assigned to future costs. So again, if we kind of remember back to some of the board trainings that we've had, we first estimate all of the benefits that will be paid from the plan, and when we come up with this estimated value of benefits, we want to allocate it between service that has already been performed. So all of the former employees, all of the employees who have provided services in the past, we allocate that to the past, and that is what we refer to as the accrued liability, and that's the basis for a funded ratio. And then the future liabilities, so the benefits that we expect to be paid that will be allocated to future service and future employment years is paid through the normal cost. So a portion of the contribution.
We're having some noise issues here. Are we okay now? Go ahead, Chris. Let's give it a try. I think we're okay now.
Okay. I do hear like some beeping going on. I don't think it's from my computer. Okay.
Your volume is not very good, Chris. Hey, Chris, would you say something so we can see if we can hear you?
Yes, I'm
Okay.
speaking now. Is this good?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So, again, this has to do with how the liabilities are allocated to past years of service versus the basically current year of service from the normal cost. So, again, the portion of the contribution being paid to represent the benefits that are being earned during the current year. So this change in the cost method is part of Act 5. So it was a legislated change to be effective with this valuation. And the new method, again, the good thing is that this is the most commonly used method by peer systems and other retirement systems in the public sector. It is also the method that's used by GASB for financial reporting. We look at this as overall being a good change that is more intuitive and can be more easily understood how other changes will affect the liabilities and the costs. So the effect of this change actually decreased the unfunded liability by $3.7 billion. And what that means is basically, again, the change does not affect the overall value of the benefits that were paid from the plan. What the change did is it changed how much of those benefits are allocated to the past. So how much of those are included in the accrued liability and ultimately the unfunded liability. So the change shifted more of those costs to the future, which again is more similar to what other systems use. And since the change reduced the unfunded liability by $3.7 billion, that resulted in an increase in the funded ratio from 64.5% under the old method to 69.6% under the new method. And again, this 69.6% is what you would want to look at when comparing the funded ratio to other systems. Almost all of the other systems that you would be using to compare would be using this new method, which is the 69.6%. So that's much more comparable. It's much more of an apples-to-apples comparison. So again, since we did shift more of the costs being allocated to future years of service, what that means is that our normal costs, so our cost for being allocated to this year of service, increased from 1.42% of pay to 8.32% of pay. So this is where you can really see what the difference in methods is. Under the old method, this normal cost was calculated for the plan based on the new entrants. So the majority of the new entrants entering under Act 5 that do provide an overall lower level of employer paid benefits. The new method, rather than calculating a cost under the new tier, the new general tier, is this 8.32% is calculated for each individual member. So each individual member is calculated a cost as a level percent of pay for their benefits being allocated to the current year of service. And when we add up all of those individual costs based on each member's benefit and benefit class and tier, if they're which group they're in, when we add up each individual in aggregate, that comes to 8.32%. So again, that is kind of the more intuitive, more easily understood cost of providing the benefits. Again, the costs allocated to the current year of service. When we look at the reduction in the past service liabilities and the increased allocation to the current year of service, overall this effect increased the employer contribution rate from 31.68% to 34.1%. So last year's results were 33.8%. So because of, again, primarily the strong investment returns that we've seen, that 33.8% from last year would have decreased down to 31.68%. And now I'm getting some feedback. So that we would have seen a decrease down to 31.
Please, if you have your mics on, please turn them off.
So we would have seen the 33.8% go down to 31.68%. But because of this legislated change and the change in how we've allocated the liabilities, we do see a slight increase from last year's employer contribution rate of 33.8% up to this year's 34.1%. And again, that was expected in the projections, that we were expecting to see an increase from last year to this year, again, primarily driven by this change in the cost method. So at this point, I will turn it over to Craig to move us forward and cover some of the other results.
All right, thank you, Chris. I'm starting on slide 9, Chris, right? But
Yes, if we could please move forward.
okay. All right, so Chris alluded to the shared risk and shared gain. So the shared risk was first introduced with Act 120 for Class A3 and Class A4 members. So we're, as of the last determination date, we have 9 years in that. The next determination date will be December 31, 2022, where we look at the investment return, and we'll be adding 3 and dropping off 2 and kind of moving forward with a 10-year average from that point. And just kind of to show where you are at this point, you have 9 years of that known and 1 year to be determined in 2022, what the excess gain or loss might be relative to the 7% assumption for the year. If the plan earns 1.06% or more, that would trigger a shared gain. So Class A3 and Class A4 would then get a 0.5% decrease in their employee contributions. Again, that's just for Class A3 and Class A4. None of this affects Act 9 membership or anything before Act 120. If the fund loses 16.21% relative to the 7% assumed return, then that would trigger the shared risk and result in a 0.5% increase in the employee contributions. And these changes to the contributions would begin July 1st, 2023, and then last for a 3-year period. The Act 5 members, Class A5 and A6, are newer, and they've got 2 years of their average so far and 1 year to go to make their first 3-year average, which began January 1 of 2019. Ultimately, it will also get to a 10-year average the way Act 20 members are currently be as of the next determination date. So with only 2 years included and 1 more year to go, there's a lot more volatility in the Class A5 and Class A6 shared risk and shared gain analysis. So because we've had 2 really good returns, to see a shared gain, if the plan loses 3.17% or anything less than that or has a gain, then there's going to be a shared gain. If the plan loses 8.48% or more, then there will be a shared risk. Now, for the Act 5 members, the A5 and A6 members, the shared gain and shared risk is 0.75%. So if it's triggered and there's a shared gain, then the employee contributions would be reduced by 0.75%. If there's a shared risk, then the employee contributions would be increased by 0.75%. If we could go on to the next slide, slide 10. Thank you. And this just shows you a comparison of what the actual returns have been versus the expected return. In 2022, this is the one that we don't know. The expected return says TBD, but we know that that's going to be 7% for the current year that we're in. When the board meets and makes a determination on the investment return assumption, that will impact next year. It'll change it for the December 31, 2022 valuation if a change is made, and that will first be effective for calendar year 2023. So we do know the expected return is 7%, and the actual return is the unknown at this point to go into this determination. But you can see from the 2020 return of 11.11% and the 2021 return of 17.24%, if you're only looking at a 3-year average, you've got a lot of excess earnings at this point, which is why the possibility of a shared gain or shared risk on Act 5 is, takes a very, very low percentage, even negative returns to trigger those two. All right, next slide.
Could we just pause for a moment? This is such a complicated subject, and I just want to give the members a chance to ask any questions on the shared risk that they might have.
Certainly.
Any questions, anyone? So at this point, none of our members have had to pay any excess, any shared risk adjustment, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. And if we have a very good year, which is hard to predict at this point, it could be they might see their employee rate go down next year?
That is correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So,
Well, and Mary, actually, it isn't just a very good year. If we have pretty much anything but a bad year, we would see at least some member classes see their contribution rate go down.
Okay.
yeah, so if the fund earns 1.06% or more, then both groups, the Act 5 and Act 120 groups, both see a shared gain and get a reduction in contribution.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any questions, anyone? All right. Go ahead, gentlemen.
All right, thank you. So the historical returns, this is just to show you a graph. Generally there have not been a lot of down years. 2008 was a very, very big down year, and that impacts a lot of, why the system is where it is today and kind of recovering from that loss and some underfunding that happened since then. But, definitely, things are looking good over the last 3 years, and the far right is that 17.24% return. So this is just to kind of show you graphically relative to your assumed return where you've been historically. Next slide. Asset smoothing. Chris talked about asset smoothing a little bit earlier, and just to give you a background on asset smoothing, there's the market value of assets, but for funding purposes, we use a smoothed, what's called an actuarial value of assets. And we look at gains or losses. A gain or loss is not relative to a 0% return. It's relative to the assumed rate of return, in this case, 7%. So if the fund earns better than 7%, we look at the excess of 7%, and we recognize 20% of that gain in the current year, and then 20% in each of the subsequent 4 years. If it comes short of that 7% expected return, that would be a loss. And the same type of, setup is done. You recognize 20% of the loss in the current year, and then 20% of that loss in the subsequent 4 years. So what we have in any given year is we have a current year 20% plus 20% from each of the prior 4 years that impacts the actuarial value of assets. So the next slide will show you how it works and whether it's doing its job or not. So on slide 13. The red line is the market value, and you can see the volatility of how it's up and down and jumping all around. And the intent of the blue line here is to kind of smooth out that volatility and give you a more stable change in your assets for funding purposes. And just from what you can see there, it's doing its job. Right now, on the far right, you can see the market value is at $40.2 billion. It's up from $35 billion last year. While the actuarial value of assets, the blue dot as of 2021, December 31, 2021, is at $36.8 billion, up from $32.7 billion last year. And we'll move to the next slide. So this is some of the change in the member information to kind of explain. It'll explain some of why the contribution is what it is this year. I'll get into a little more of that later. One of the interesting things is the population is down. The active population we're talking about is down 3%, down to just shy of 98,000, and it was close to 101,000 last year. The change in age of the population, the average age didn't change much. The average service didn't change at all. Generally, what you have is everybody accrues an additional year of service, who stays in the plan. You have longer service people retiring or leaving, and then you have shorter, you have new members coming in. So part of it brings the average up, part of it brings the average down, and it ends up, this year in particular, the average service stayed unchanged. The average compensation of the membership increased 2.2% from $63,800 up to $65,200. But because the overall number of people decreased 3%, the annualized compensation is actually down right around 1%. So what we project for the funding payroll for the next year is also down about 1%. The retiree population continues to grow, although it didn't grow much this year, just a 0.8% increase in the number of annuitants and beneficiaries who are currently in pay status, and their average age went up just a little bit, 0.3 years. The average pension did go up, though, 3.2%, and the main reason for that is people who are earning benefits today, the pension plan is pay related, so your benefit is defined as a percentage of your pay based on the number of years you worked. So in general, pay is higher now than it was when people who historically went into pay status 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. So in general, you're going to see benefits higher for people retiring today than what they were historically. The different accruals will have an impact on that, for the Act 9 accruals being higher, but I think the main driver is that payroll's higher and benefits are higher as a result. So when you have new retirees coming in with a higher average pension, it's going to bring up the overall pension a good bit more than what the population increased. All right, and inactives and vesteds are just people who are due either a future benefit, which might be a monthly annuity. Sometimes it might just be a refund of contributions that haven't been paid out. So the next slide, please. All right, so now here's, Chris already talked about some of these numbers, but he talked about the normal cost change and the change in the funding method, and that's why there's the large increase from 1.5% to 8.32%. The amortization of liabilities as a result of the normal cost increasing. He mentioned that the unfunded liability decreased a good bit, and that's the reason for the amortization of liabilities to go down. The extra contribution to Return Act 5 savings, we also call this the plowback. This was introduced with Act 5, and when the Act 5 projections were done, there were periods that showed reductions in cost. And the way the legislation was set up is it said, let's take these gains and let's actually make contributions based on the savings that occurs in expected savings that occurs in certain years. So that 0.62 was based on a short period up front here where there were savings, and now for the next 10 years there weren't any savings projected. So what's going to happen in the December 31, 2031 valuation, this contribution is going to come back, and it's going to be around for 10 years. So the way the projection worked is it looked at a 30-year period, and any years there were savings, this extra contribution was introduced. So it goes away, it returns in 2031 at a 0.1%, and then it trends up, to a 0.93% in the final year before it ultimately goes away forever. So where we ended up is with a total contribution of 34.1% relative to last year's 33.76%. And the one thing I'd like to point out is that if the population hadn't decreased by 3%, if payroll had increased roughly 2.8%, according to our expectations, the fixed amount amortization, which is a flat dollar amount, would have ended up bringing down this contribution. It would have been lower than it was last year, but because
Chris, we lost your volume.
Hey, Craig, your sound cut out.
my sound cut out.
Oh, you're back now. You're back.
I'm back.
Okay.
Sorry. All right. So I'll hold this forward a little just to make sure it's not getting muffled by my shirt.
Yeah,
So,
you were starting to explain the relationship that the contribution rate would have gone down. The reason the rate is high is, again, because we're comparing it to this lower payroll amount this year, because we did see what was about 3,000 less active members.
That's correct.
Included in the funding payroll this year. So you're just starting to explain that relationship.
Okay, correct. Thanks. All right. So if the payroll had not gone down 1% and it had gone up the expected 2.8%, then the amortization, which is a fixed dollar amount, would have been a lower percentage of payroll, and that would have brought down the cost this year. But instead, it went up a little bit, but not far off from where it was last year. The benefits completion plan is the 415M plan, and under the Internal Revenue Code, there's limits on benefits under 415B that say that you can't have a benefit that exceeds a certain dollar amount. There are a handful of employees in the plan who are receiving benefits in excess of that amount. So the main plan trust can't pay those out, but this benefits completion plan can pay out those excess benefit amounts, and that's what's being done at this point. So we set up a contribution that's intended to cover the cost of the benefits, and it will also cover the possible death of the two highest death benefits in the plan, because you can't overfund this benefit, but you can come up with a reasonable way of creating some small amount of potential pre-funding, but you can't over pre-fund this particular plan. So. That's why it's going up to 0.06%. It was borderline. We could have kept it at 0.05%, but we just felt that 0.06%, just gave you that little bit of extra that could be needed should, the two highest benefit people happen to die in the same year. So that ends up leading to an overall total contribution that's needed to the plan of 34.16%. Comparison of the funded status, Chris went over some of these numbers before, but the increase in the funded status was pretty significant. The market value increased from just under 64% to 76%, and the actuarial value increased from 59% to just shy of 70%. At the very bottom of this table, we have the unfunded liability. The unfunded liability measures the total actuarial accrued liability, subtracts from it the actuarial value of assets, and then that would be the $16.1 billion shown at the bottom under the 2021 column. Then we have these set-off amounts for Penn State and for PASHE that will reflect future set-offs that they're going to get. Due to the fact that they pre-funded $1,061 million in the case of Penn State and $825 million in the case of PASHE. So they are due future set-offs to their contribution requirements. So that's what that almost $1.9 billion is. So when we set up an amortization, we have to set up a cost that's inflated so that when the set-offs are recognized, the amount coming into the plan is, it matches what we say needs to come into the plan for the year. So that's why we have this amortization liability that's approximately $1.9 billion higher than the unfunded liability. All right, a lot of information there. We can go on to the next slide. If there are questions,
yeah.
Please
One quick thing while we're there before we jump forward, we can see that change in that unfunded liability from last year to this year. $6 billion less. So a very big decrease in the unfunded liability. Again, a lot related to the change in the cost method, but not all of it. Again, very strong investment returns and all-around experience. So,
very good. All right, so the next page will show you the breakout of some of the reasons, why that $6.3 billion reduction in unfunded liability happened. First is the change in the funding method, and it had a significant upward impact on the normal cost, downward impact on the amortization liability. So 6.9% percentage point increase in the normal cost, 4.48 percentage point decrease in the amortization liability, for a net 2.42 percentage point increase overall in that top area. If you look down to the bottom area, you'll see the $3,699,000,000. So that $3.7 billion decrease is the decrease in the unfunded liability that occurred due to the change in the funding method. The number right below that, almost $1.4 billion, is the excess earnings that are recognized through the smoothing method. So there's going to be some natural growth in the assets, expected based on the 7% return. On top of that, another $1.4 billion of gains was recognized through this year. So overall, that decreased the amortization liability up top in item 2B by 1.68%. So that helped reduce the cost. There's the next several items are smaller. The pay increase was not quite as large as we expected. We expect something in the aggregate to be close to 4.6% for continuing actives. I came in a little bit below that, so there was a gain. The all other kind of demographics together, outside of the ones explained, had a slight impact of roughly 51 million, and 52 million, and then the other 52 million is for the differences between actual or the change in the demographics of new entrants. Now, this is the last time you're going to see this item. The change in demographic of new entrants is tied to the old funding method, and the way we did it this year is we did our valuation under the old method, and then we went from the old method to the new method so that we could kind of see step by step how things changed. So where there was, a 0.08% reduction in the normal cost, which you can see in line 2E, and a 0.06% increase in the amortization due to a new entrant cohort that was different this year than what it was last year, that's going to go away because now we're determining all the normal costs based on each individual as opposed to a new entrant cohort. So that explains the main changes in the liability, the gains and losses in the liability. So if we move to slide 17, we look at the historical rates. So overall, your 34.1% is that top right blue square. If we go down to the red line and we look at the normal cost, you can see from 2009 to 2010, we have the introduction of Act 120, which created a lower tier of benefit, and that the new entrant cohort at that point had a lower accrual. And you can see the normal cost in red stayed fairly constant over that period, right around 5%. And then when Act 5 came into play, it reduced the new entrant accrual group again. So when we were looking at the A5s and A6s, that had a lower normal cost percentage. So what you see now is in 2021, where it jumps up to the 8.32%, we now have a blend of all of these populations. You have a blend of Act 9, you have a blend of Act 120, and a blend of Act 5 members. And so what's going to happen is this normal cost over time is going to go down, and it's going to end up being a blend of the exempt population, which are most of the hazardous duty employees will continue to have an Act 120 structure, which will be around 5%, and then all other new members who enter the defined benefit plan are going to have an accrual somewhere around 1.5%, or a normal cost around 1.5%. So you're going to end up with an overall normal cost somewhere between 1.5% and 5%. Going forward, ultimately, once the Act 9 members kind of move out of the system and retire. Next slide. And just to see graphically what the funded status looks like, you can see, back leading up to the 2000s, the 90s, run up in the markets led to a very high funded ratio. And then post 9/11, there was a downturn and kind of a recovery until 2008. And now you're on the road to recovery. It's been fairly stable, but starting to show recovery after the 2008 downturn. So what you see in the far right there is those two red squares to the far right is a 64% going up to 76%. on a market value funded basis, and then the actuarial value trailing that because it smooths it from 59% last year to 70% this year. If you want to jump 2 slides to slide 20. So the 34.1% or 34.16 when we include the benefits completion plan is paid by different member groups, and the way the code allows the contributions to be made, we look at the value of the benefits that the different membership is receiving. So if you have a 2.5% accrual, and you're an Act 9 member, you've got a higher accrual than what an Act 120 member who may have a 2% accrual and an age 65 normal retirement versus an Act 5 member who may have a 1.25% accrual and an age 67 retirement. So that all gets factored in here. We establish the normal cost for each individual, and then we spread the unfunded liability out over these groups based on the value of the benefit. And that gives us these series of contribution rates that apply to the different member classes. So that's what this is. This is what will be put out there, and these contributions will start to be made July 1, 2022, and this is going to be one of the items that you'll be approving today. All right, and finally, next steps, slide 22. So, as I said, ultimately the board will approve the contribution rates, the singular 34.16%, and then those individual rates, and just kind of, some information. The Penn State will have a set off to the amounts shown there equal to $93.3 million in the fiscal year, and PASHE will have $79.9 million as a set off amount, and those are due to their little over $1 billion and $825 million early contributions that they made, pre-funding contributions that they made. In June, we will be back with Callan to present economic expectations, and at that point, the board will be able to vote on whether to maintain the 7% or whether to go to a lower investment return assumption, and that will first impact the December 31, 2022 valuation and be part of our next stress testing analysis. That covers all the information we have. I guess any questions you may have, the floor is open.
Any questions for Chris or Craig? Well, thank you both. I mean, this is such a complicated subject, and it was excellent that you were able to do the presentation at the retreat for us to refresh some of us and bring some of our newer members up to speed. So once again, any questions while we have Chris and Craig here? All right. They will be available at the board meeting, but our intent at this point is that they will not be repeating this presentation. The presentation will be available with the board documents, of course, when we meet as a full board. All right. With that, a motion is in order. Now, this is a very lengthy motion, so give me some time to read through it all. A motion is in order to recommend that the State Employees Retirement Board, A, approve the results of the December 31st, 2021 actuarial valuation, and for the Commonwealth's fiscal year 2022-23, certify the following contribution rates. Number 1, shared risk contribution rate of 0%. Number 2, employer normal cost contribution rate of 8.32%. Number 3, composite employer contribution rate necessary for funding of the system of 34.1%. And number 4, employer contribution rates by group and class of service of employees as set forth in the actuarial valuation as calculated by CSRS Consulting Actuary, Korn Ferry, pursuant to Section 5508 of the State Employees Retirement Code. B, authorize SERS staff and Korn Ferry to use the above rates to develop all the employer rates for the period of July 1, 2022 to June 30th, 2023, pursuant to Section 5902, Section K of the State Employees Retirement Code. C, establish an employer contribution rate of 0.06% for the fiscal year 2022-23 to fund the benefits completion plan established pursuant to Section 5941 of the State Employees Retirement Code. And finally, D, authorize the executive director to certify such rates to all employers with employees who are active members of SERS and to the Secretary of the Budget. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Okay. Is there a second? May I have a second on the motion, please?
Second, Pat Shaughnessy.
Thank you. Mr. McGurry, may we have a roll call, please?
Senator DeSanto,
Aye.
Board Chairman Philman,
Aye.
Mr. Shaughnessy,
Aye.
Committee Chair Soderberg,
Aye.
and Mr. Flanagan.
Aye.
The ayes have it.
Okay.
5 ayes.
The motion passes. And thank you very much. We will be, this proposal will come before the full board then in 2 weeks. All right. The only new business we have for our agenda are some informational items on membership and benefit lists for the last 3 months. With that, are there any, next item, any comments, concerns, questions by members of the committee? Okay, well, thank you very much. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right. This concludes the April 28th meeting of the Finance and Member and Participant Services Committee. Thank you all very much.